Well, this is an exciting adventure, this dropping of the needle. Last summer, when we were brainstorming and began to plan this sermon series, we imagined some of the verses that might be randomly chosen. What if we got a verse that just isn't preachable, we wondered. We couldn't really plan more than a week ahead, and just how is that going to work? It seemed like there were some risks in doing this series, but that, we decided, is what might make it interesting. Certainly for us as preachers, and hopefully for you all as well. And have we hit the jackpot? Pastor Jason drew a verse from 2 Corinthians about renewal and highlighted its compelling relevance to what is happening around us, especially in relation to the racism that continues to run rampant in our country and even right here in our very own communities. Last week, Pastor Eric was delighted to preach from Ezekiel as we explored again the sin of nationalism, not just here, but worldwide, and the pride of power. So that brings us to this morning. Did you know that there are over 32,000 verses in the Bible as we know it? And this morning, we are lucky or blessed enough to look at a verse in which a donkey talks and her owner, a blind prophet, threatens to kill her if only he had a sword. This has been called perhaps the most bizarre verse in all of Scripture. And as you can see, she's laughing with us, but I don't think she'll laugh for long. You know, we find ourselves in the book of Numbers. One source claims that the book of Numbers itself is chock full of amazing Torah treats, just waiting to be unpacked. According to another commentary, Numbers is the source of all Jewish comedy in which the Israelites take a census, complain a lot, send spies into the promised land, and annoy God so much with their griping that God condemns them to 40 years in the desert. Moses quashes 2 rebellions, then he himself is banned from entering the promised land. Of course, we have our prophet named Balaam and his talking donkey that we're looking at this morning. Then the Israelites enrage God by cavorting with Moabite women, prompting Moses to order a mass slaughter of enemy women and children, all in one book. It seems like this is entertainment at its best. You know, given the high drama, maybe it's a surprise that we don't spend more time in Numbers. I've heard from several of the retired pastors among us this week, and you shared words of encouragement, and for that I'm grateful. Some of you have even preached this text before. I'd love to hear more, what it might have said at another time and in another place. So let's start at the beginning with our exploration of Numbers in this day, in this age, in this place. This particular story is found about 2/3 of the way through the book of Numbers, which is the 4th book of the Torah. The Torah are the first 5 books of what we know as the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. The book begins with a census, which is how the book got its name, Numbers. The Israelites were camped at the foot of Mount Sinai and were preparing to enter Canaan, the land that they hoped to inhabit. The people had received God's laws. Moses had come down off the mountain in all of his glowing presence, and the people were ready to move. This tribe-by-tribe census was intended to count those eligible for military service. There were a total of 603,550 men. Women, of course, weren't counted at all. Our scripture is the story of Balaam, a pagan prophet or soothsayer who had a great reputation through the practice of divination and other magical arts. We don't exactly know his country of origin, but we know that he was most likely not an Israelite. King Balak of Moab feared the Israelites. He had heard how they defended themselves against the Edomites and the Amorites and had successfully captured both of those lands in order to continue their trek. Balak knew that in their wandering toward Canaan, they would be drawing too close for comfort, this formidable force to be bargained with. King Balak of Moab wanted to hire Balaam to put a curse on the Israelites so that he could keep his own people, the Moabites, safe. Hear this story as recorded in the book of Numbers, chapter 22. Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went off with the noblemen from Moab. As he was going, though, God's anger flared. The angel of God stood in the road to block his way. Balaam was riding his donkey, accompanied by his 2 servants. When the donkey saw the angel blocking the road and brandishing a sword, she veered off the road into a ditch. Balaam beat the donkey and got her back on the road. But as they were going through a vineyard with a fence on either side, the donkey saw again God's angel blocking the way and veered into the fence, crushing Balaam's foot against the fence. Balaam hit her again. God's angel blocked the way yet again, a very narrow passage this time. There was no getting through on the right or the left. Seeing the angel, Balaam's donkey sat down under him. Balaam lost his temper. He beat the donkey with his stick. Then God gave speech to the donkey. She said to Balaam, "What have I ever done to you that you have beat me these 3 times?" And here's our key verse. Balaam said, "Because you've been playing games with me, or made a fool of me. If I had a sword, I would have killed you by now." The donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your trusty donkey on whom you've ridden for years, right up until now? Have I ever done anything like this to you before? Have I?" He said no. Then God helped Balaam see what was going on. He saw God's angel blocking the way, brandishing a sword. Balaam fell to the ground, his face in the dirt. God's angel said to him, why have you beaten your poor donkey these 3 times? I have come here to block your way because you're getting way ahead of yourself. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If she hadn't, I would have killed you by this time, but not the donkey. I would have let her off." Balaam said to God's angel, "I have sinned. I had no idea you were standing in the road blocking my way. If you don't like what I'm doing, I'll head back." But God's angel said to Balaam, "Go ahead and go with them, but only say what I tell you to say. Absolutely no other word." Well, if we find this story bewildering, we are not alone. This passage perhaps raises far more questions than answers. At first, God told Balaam not to go to curse the Israelites on Balak's behalf. Then God did an about-face and told Balaam to go, and God would tell him what to say. As Balaam then set off on his donkey with God's permission, he was stopped in his tracks by an angel of the Lord, no less, an angel with a sword. The donkey ended up explaining, in spoken, clear words, why she refused to budge 3 times and continue the journey. Ironically, no one present seemed to think it was odd to hear a donkey talk. So Balaam decided not to go and pronounce the curse. Instead, he ended up blessing the people 3 times over at God's instructions. And Balak was denied his request for protection through the combined efforts of an angel brandishing a sword, a talking donkey, and the professional soothsayer who was an outsider. You know, if we just hone in on the one verse, verse 29, let's listen to those words again. Balaam said, "Because you've made a fool of me, if I had a sword, I would have killed you by now." You know, this verse, the one that was chosen with the dropped needle, if it were standing alone, it might make us ask ourselves, when have I been embarrassed by someone, or when have I been hurt by someone to the point that I'm really, really angry, to the point of wanting to hurt that person back? And how we handle our anger is important. But then I got to thinking there's so much more to this scripture than just that one verse. We were warned in seminary not to take one verse alone, but to consider the context of any passage. We are separated from this story by time and by distance, by language and by culture. And this was a story, not a factual document. It was passed on orally, handed down from generation to generation in a storytelling culture. So what do we know here? We do know that there's a lot of speaking and listening going on. Balaam is listening to God, who appears as an angel. Balaam is listening to the donkey. The donkey is listening to Balaam. Balak is listening to Balaam. They all speak. Perhaps one of the surprising turn of events in this story is that it confronts us with the revelation that God maintains active and personal relationships with people through a variety of religious structures. Balaam is not an Israelite, nor is the point of the story that he is converted and becomes an Israelite. And yet, God speaks in any number of ways. Perhaps God is modeling here for us a way to engage with others, to listen and to speak regardless, and perhaps because of who the other is and where they are from. God speaks. God speaks through the work of CEPI that we saw a little bit ago. This nonprofit, which, by the way, we are sponsoring with our walk to Nigeria, which you heard about also, serves everyone. It serves Christians, Muslims, and pagans. The CEPI hotline for victims of domestic violence and rape accepts calls of all women. In the livelihood centers where women learn life skills to support themselves and their children, women of all faiths learn together and work side by side. They share stories of their suffering as they comfort and encourage one another. They experience healing as they speak and as they listen. Says Rebecca, they love one another and remind one another that they are not alone. God speaks when a Muslim woman sits next to and becomes friends with a Christian woman at the CEPI Livelihood Center, where both are learning to use a sewing machine to support themselves and their children. And then they each receive a sewing machine at their graduation. God speaks through the Mason Technical Institute in Garkita, which was established by the Church of the Brethren. It too is interfaith, as Muslim and Christian youth learn technical skills side by side and get along well. When the Boko Haram came through Garkita in the insurgency in 2014, the Muslim students told them, if you're going to destroy a religious building, destroy the mosque. Miraculously, the Boko Haram, a radical Islamic group, did not destroy anything in Garkita at that time. Unfortunately, just this past year, they did great damage as they burnt and destroyed much in that town. God speaks as we continue our walk to Garkita, and we remember our sisters and our brothers, Christian, Muslim, and pagan in that place. And one more story from Nigeria. On land purchased near Abuja, Marcus Gamache founded an IDP, or an internally displaced persons camp, that's very different than any others. Because of his early teaching and deeply held belief that Christians and Muslims can live side by side peacefully, this camp, now a village, is 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. Not only has housing been equitably granted, but both a Christian church and a Muslim mosque have been in the plans from the very beginning. Gurku is providing ways for people to not only feed their families in a land of famine, but also to earn a living with enough income to pay for education for their children. Women are up at the crack of dawn to tend their small farming plots, and the possibilities have increased exponentially with the gift of a tractor and implements to this community from the Church of the Brethren, U.S. Many of you supported this effort in 2017. The residents say that the ground is soft because it is better tilled to receive seed. Plant immersion has increased with the tractor. The residents can farm far larger fields with this addition. God speaks when one of the Gurku elders remarks, "These children will never forget the day that the tractor came to town." God speaks as several young families host a potluck in our own fellowship hall and invite Muslims from the Islamic Center of Lancaster. Readings about gratitude are shared from the Christian Bible and the Quran. The children play together, the youth hang out, and the adults share around the tables. Everyone found that they have far more in common than different. God speaks when one of our own young adults organizes a field trip to a local synagogue for a Shabbat service to break bread with and support our Jewish friends in times of persecution. God speaks, and we ask ourselves, like Balaam, are we listening? Like the donkey, do we lose our footing on the path? Like Balak, do we fear the other? God speaks as we continue to be mindful of the coronavirus and the danger it poses to so many, especially if we become sloppy or careless. God speaks when together we embrace and celebrate Juneteenth, yesterday and always, standing in solidarity and hope with our brothers and sisters of all races. During one of his moving speeches, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." What you probably don't hear is the question he asked that followed. What is it that we have failed to hear? God speaks in any number of ways. God surely speaks in Jesus, who has said to you and to me, "Whoever has ears, let them hear." Sisters and brothers, God speaks. Boom. Drop the mic.